We're going to start today first with Ondrej Bartos from Credo Ventures. Ondrej, welcome to the show. I've heard about your firm from your friends from the Czech Republic or Czechia now, and you may have seen the stories we've done on some of your local colleagues. So I'm really looking forward to getting acquainted with you.
Hi.
Your line is breaking off, so we need to clean that up. How do we do that?
No idea.
That is much
better. Get better.
That is much better. That is already much better. Fantastic. All right. Well, I would like to start by having you introduce yourself and Credo Ventures to our audience here, and then we'll discuss what you're up to out there and what are the trends in your space and so on.
Cool. Great. So again, thanks for having me. As mentioned, I'm a GP at Credo Ventures, which is a VC firm based out of Prague, Czech Republic, doing seed and Series A investing in Central Europe. Compared to 1Mby1M, we're a young firm because we only started a year after you did. So we started Credo in 2009 with the aim to actually create a Central European VC firm with Silicon Valley DNA and aspirations and ambitions. So our aim since the very beginning has been to invest into startups with global ambitions who aim to compete in the global markets and who aim to address big problems with innovative and smart solutions. We currently are just about to close our Fund 3, which will be around $100 million. Our previous two funds, so we started with a small sort of pilot fund to test the hypotheses that venture capital of the Silicon Valley type can work in a region as remote and exotic as Central Europe. So we started with a $20 million fund, and then our second fund was about $60 million. We've made 42 investments up until now, and now we aim to double down on our investment thesis, which is built basically around the region that we're in. So
let's actually double-click down on some of the things that you said and just get some color on how do you define seeds, how do you define Series A? Well, yes, I guess we should define Series A for Central Europe as well. What are you looking for in seed in terms of validation?
Right. So when we talk about, we basically talk about investments up to 1 million euros or say $1.2 million. And what we look at mostly at the seed stage is the team and the founder and the size of the opportunity. So we don't necessarily look at revenue. We don't look at any other market validation. It can be pre-launch. It can be pre-revenue, but we're really interested to see a big opportunity in terms of big target market, and we very much look at the team and the founders. We consider ourselves to be very founder friendly and founder centric. So founders and teams are very important to us.
The 42 investments that you've made, how many of those are concept stage investments and how many already had prototype and some market validation?
I'd say about a third would fall into a bracket of, conceptual or pre-revenue stage.
Okay.
Then another third would be the ones that already had product out in the market, but just with initial revenue and not quite product market fit. And the last third would be for Series A investments or large seeds where we saw already some traction.
So what is the geographical boundary of, when you say Central European investments, how far do you go? What are the 4 regions? Obviously, you have Prague and surroundings, but what else?
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about Central Europe, it's basically the region between Germany and sort of Ukraine, those two excluded. So it's countries like the Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Slovenia. This is the space that we operate in.
And the 42 that you've done so far, what is the bulk? Is it 50% Prague, 70% Prague? What's the distribution?
No, I'd say we consider the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which actually used to be one country not that long ago. We consider our home market. And I'd say about 40% of our investments have been originated in those 2 countries, and the rest is the rest of the region.
And are there any other hotspots in those other places besides Czech Republic and Slovakia?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a number of investments in Poland, which is the largest market in our region, and also Poland has been pretty active and vibrant as a market. We are big fans of Romania, as you might or might not know. Our currently most successful startup is a Romanian company called UiPath, which happens to be the first unicorn born out of Romania. And we've done 2 more investments in Romania. And in general, that's a place where we see a lot of action, a lot of activity, a lot of hunger. What is important to say, as I mentioned, we only look at startups with global ambitions. We are not excited about copycats or, too niche plays. So we only invest into the ones that can make it big eventually.
Just to give some context for the audience, there have been a couple of very successful consumer antivirus companies out of Prague, AVG and Avast, and which eventually merged, and today is a larger company. That's probably the first major success story out of that region. And then we'll double click down into UiPath but I want to ask you one question before we do that. What do you like to invest in? Is it B2B, B2C, everything, or is it just B2B? What's your preference?
So we are not specialized. So being in a region like Central Europe, we unfortunately, depends on how you look, we don't have the luxury of our peers in the Bay Area or in Silicon Valley to be able to specialize. How we position ourselves is we look at anything in technology, either producing technology products or using technologies in a significant way, and so we can do either B2B or B2C. If you asked me 3 years back whether we would do anything in hardware, I would have probably told you no, but ta-da, we've made 2 hardware investments as well. So what we really care for is the big ambition, is some kind of a competitive edge, some good reason why the company could or should succeed. I can tell you that most of our investments are B2B, and our most typical investee or portfolio company is enterprise software, but it's not because we prefer those kind of companies, but it's just because it's a lot more probable or likely that an enterprise software company succeeds coming out of Central Europe than, say, consumer company.
Right.
I don't think a Facebook could have been born in Hungary. That's just too
not
unlikely.
in 2004, but we will see. Skype was born in Estonia.
Yeah, Skype was born in Estonia. I still believe that the founders of Skype had previous exposure and access to the Silicon Valley, and without that.
But today that is very easily available, right? You can, if you can get a concept validated and get to some extent, moving to some extent, you can sort of do the very early stage in Central Europe, and you can always raise more money and set up a second headquarters here in Silicon Valley and get that access. I mean, the bridge between India and Silicon Valley has become really powerful, and there are a lot of companies who are operating in this mode, and I just don't see any reason why Europe cannot do that, replicate that. It's not as solid. The European connection to Silicon Valley is not as solid as the Indian connection, but it should be. In due course, it should be. So let's talk about UiPath. Yeah? You were saying something.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to agree with what you said. And truth is that, globalization is progressing, and it is my deep belief that, in any part of the world, any kind of startup can be born. It's just that in some places it's more likely to be a successful enterprise software company, and in some other places it's more likely to build a successful consumer play. That's all. But I totally agree that it's possible. Yeah, let's talk about UiPath.
Tell us when you saw this company, at what stage, what did they have, what caught your attention, and what did it go on to become?
Yeah, it's I like talking about that story, so let's talk about that. So I first met the founder of UiPath, I believe in January 2015, and at that point UiPath was really just 10 people in a dodgy Bucharest apartment who had interesting technology, which they were selling at that point as an SDK or as an installed software with a perpetual license, but it was very well designed, and it worked really well, and so that was one part of the story. The other one was that the two founders seemed to be one of the most passionate and nice people that I've met. So, the combination of those two things, plus, looking at the market, we thought that it was really great timing for, an automation software of that kind. So,
can you talk a bit about what they do so that people can have the context?
Sorry, exactly. They do what's called robotic process automation. So they use software to automate repetitive, mundane tasks in organizations, mostly large ones. So think of it as software robots that can perform tasks that are very usually still performed by people, but shouldn't be because they're repetitive, rule-based, and software can do them, much better actually and efficiently than people. That's how it started. So when
you met them, were they already doing that for some enterprises?
Yeah, they were not doing it on the scale they're doing it now, but yes, they've already had some customers, but they had a couple of $100,000 in revenue, and as I said, it was not recurring revenue. It was perpetual licenses and some revenue from SDK sales. So. They only so we invested in the summer of 2015 in a seed round, in a $1.6 million seed round, together with Early Bird and SeedCam. Early Bird is another Central and Eastern European VC, and SeedCamp is probably the one of the top seed funds in Europe, and only in the fall of 2015 they actually turned the business into SaaS, into subscription. So only after the investment they started to generate recurring revenue.
And where are they getting traction in terms of customers? I assume they're going after enterprise customers. Where, what segments, what kind of use cases are they getting the most traction in?
So this is very different from between then and now, because UiPath now is already a company with over 2,000 employees. So up from 10 when we invested, they're now over 2,000, and they have 9-digit recurring revenues. I believe it's around 180 million in ARR these days. So, but back then we thought that the most logical way to start would be financial services and BPOs, business process optimization. So those were the segments that we went after, and we did get traction. But what happened, and it's not a common thing to happen actually, to be honest. the initial growth of UiPath, the initial growth in 2016 and a good portion of 2017 was really based on inbound. So, it somehow happened that the company timed their go-to-market so well that all of a sudden there was a lot of demand for automation, for, software, robotic automation specifically. And so they started growing into segments that we did not think would be the most obvious, like healthcare, public, insurance, stuff like that.
Okay. And in the other 41 deals that you have invested in, what are some of the trends? What kinds of stuff have you started seeing success with?
So this is something which will be somewhat specific to our region. You have to bear in mind that we're in Central Europe or Central and Eastern Europe, which is on one hand known for good, solid technical talent and engineering talent. On the other hand, which suffers from lack of marketing and sales talent and experience. So what we've started seeing as a trend is that the more successful companies in our portfolio, companies that we've invested in, are the ones that are led by people who have had previous exposure and experience with the hard-working culture environments, people who have worked in startups before or who have went through a Google or Facebook experience as employees, people who have, even worked with consultancies, the McKinseys and BCGs of this world. So I would not necessarily call those people diaspora because some of them never left the region per se, but many of the successful founders that we see have had some previous experience with Silicon Valley, with London, with Berlin. And, the founder of UiPath is one example because he spent a couple of years in Redmond working for Microsoft before he went back to Romania and eventually founded UiPath.
And what conclusions are you drawing and what best practices are you replicating across the portfolio vis-a-vis setting up a Silicon Valley presence or a U.S. presence? Like what is your UiPath's trajectory and what is the trajectory of your more successful companies to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that UiPath still is a big outlier in the region. And I'd say in Europe, actually, it's one of the one of the fastest growing enterprise software companies of all time. So taking UiPath a little bit aside, one of the learnings.
Before you set UiPath aside, though, what has been UiPath's strategy? Have they set up Silicon Valley very early on, or US very early on? What is their geographical location and headquarter, and how is the company run from a scaling perspective?
Right. So, truth is, they started expanding fairly early on, and they started with two territories, so to speak. One is the U.S., It's not the Silicon Valley, but New York. It's the East Coast. And for a company like UiPath, it may make sense because, you know, they focus on the big, you know, Fortune 500 companies as potential customers. So the East Coast is a good option. That was one of the first ones.
A lot of European companies actually prefer to set up their U.S. headquarters in New York or Boston. Part of it is just the time zone and the accessibility. Silicon Valley is far from Europe. I mean, it's far from India too, and it's far from China. But I think for European companies, I think I have seen this in a lot of European companies that have chosen New York or Boston over Silicon Valley as their U.S. headquarters. So go ahead.
3 hours is 180 minutes. That's that's a lot. So yes, I agree that the East Coast is something to consider. But I always tell my founders that it really, really mostly depends on the type of business they're in. It very much depends on where the target customers are. It depends on where the potential partners are and so forth. So in our portfolio, there's actually more companies that moved further west all the way to the Silicon Valley than to the East Coast. We have a couple of East Coast companies as well, but Silicon Valley still wins. That's the melting pot. That's where, you know, many of the potential partners, customers, and potential acquirers sit. So that's how it is. And
so you are pushing,
to conclude,
so it was set up Silicon Valley or equivalent early on, not leave it till later.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
I think so, especially if you wanna grow fast, because, you know, as we've learned, the U.S. is just a totally different league in terms of, you know, the speed of growth that you can achieve there, and there are even companies that we don't consider as successful. And one of the reasons they were not as successful as they could be was that they moved to the U.S. too late, or they actually failed to move to the U.S. And to conclude, and you will like hearing that, right after setting up New York, in the case of UiPath, we set up India. One of the reasons was that, as I said, one of the early verticals we were going after was BPO, and you know, there's a lot of BPO business in India, but also because we felt like it could be a good idea to start another sort of developer engineering center outside of sort of Romania. So at this point, it's still Romania with most of the people working for UiPath. It's I believe it's now more than 500 people in Romania and in Bucharest and Cluj mostly. Then second biggest center of gravity, if you will, is the U.S. with most of the salespeople, Salesforce. And then the third one would be India.
And what trends do you see in the BPO industry with UiPath? Because the case for the Indian BPO industry was cheap labor. So now are you saying that you're bringing in software and replacing the cheap labor?
What I'm saying is that we're bringing software to make the slightly cheaper labor even more productive and efficient. Because with RPA, it's not necessarily that we're replacing the people, but we're empowering the people, and we're giving the people a chance to work on a lot more interesting and useful stuff than they used to, because they had to.
But that's not the basis of the Indian BPO industry. The Indian BPO industry is to do exactly what you are doing with technology, is to automate or to, outsource all these routine, mundane tasks.
I do agree. Also, I'd say BPO is already not among the top verticals that UiPath is going after, but still, I still believe that it's an interesting proposition for the BPO industry as well. It's just that it's not the most
I don't think we need to
obvious.
belabor this point. I have a lot of thoughts on this because I've long believed that the entire BPO industry is going to disappear because of automation. So I think UiPath is a very good example of a company that is going to enable that transition to happen. It will happen. Sooner or later, it will happen.
I'm a believer of that too.
Okay. So I think we've got a good sense of what's happening in your universe. Is there anything else that you want to add before we conclude this segment?
To conclude, so I come from this region. I love Central and Eastern Europe. I'm a big believer that it had been overseen for a long time. I remember, the early days when we were coming to the Silicon Valley in 2010, 2011, 2012, and everybody was looking at us as, where are you guys coming from? Is it, Chechnya, or is it Russia? It was improbable to seek something interesting in our geography, but I think this is changing rapidly, and looking at things like HackerRank and other sources, you can see that Central and Eastern European engineers and programmers are now considered to be among the best in the world, and therefore I am a huge believer in the region, and I believe it can be used both as engineering center for U.S. or Western European startups, as well as, a melting pot for the new generation of startups. And are
you finding good collaborators in Silicon Valley, like funds who are willing to invest in a company that's starting largely in Central Europe?
Yeah, the change is visible also on numbers. It is visible on stats, on number of deals. We have co-invested alongside, Sequoia, Kleiner, Axel, Index, which has European genes per se, but we have invested alongside Flybridge, which is an East Coast-based fund, Baseline, which is a San Francisco-based fund. So, yes, we do see more and more appetite, and more importantly, maybe we see more belief and conviction in the big VCs that it is actually possible to build something really interesting and competitive out of Central and Eastern Europe.
Very good. Well, it's wonderful to hear what you're up to and what your region is up to, how it's growing. We have been covering this for a while, so it's wonderful to see the progression and have you here. So thank you, Ondrej, for participating, and we'll keep in touch. I would actually like to feature UiPath in our Entrepreneur Journey series. So if you introduce them to to my team, they will schedule the interview.
Sounds great. Let's do that.
All right, we'll keep in touch.
Thanks, Romana, again for having me, and good luck to the entrepreneurs who will be pitching, and good luck to everybody who's trying.